Welcome to Sober.Coffee, a weekly coffee chat sharing experience, strength, and hope for anyone on the sober road to recovery. You can download Sober.Coffee weekly on all podcast platforms and check us out on Instagram at Sober.Coffee Podcast and on Twitter at Sober.Coffee Pod. To learn more about us and to help support these sessions, visit online at Sober.Coffee. Here are your hosts, two guys on their own path to recovery, Mike and Glenn. Let's join them at the coffee shop.
Hey, good morning there, Glenn.
Hey, brother, how you doing, man? They had our table available for us this morning.
Dude, I know, and I'm sitting at a different seat. It kind of feels a little funky, but you got to change things up every now and then.
Speaking of seats, man, I had dinner last night with my wife and some friends. Great restaurant, great food. Everything was perfect. The seat I was sitting in, oh, my gosh. I mean, it was terrible. You know, you spend all that money for a restaurant, right? Why not get a good seat?
Good chair. Did you tip the chair?
No, I didn't tip the chair, but I tipped the waitress really well because, A, that's what we do, and secondly, she was a rock star. So it was good. But anyhow, hey, coffee this morning, bright and early.
Well, I had coffee, pre-coffee coffee, and I spilled it on myself, so I almost want to say, people, welcome to the sober.coffee.spillonyourshirt.com session.
So I have to tell you this. I got out of my car this morning. I have an empty can of bubbly, not to promote bubbly, but bubbly water.
Yeah.
Right? And it fell on the driveway. And it made me shiver. It made me think of the old days.
Empty cans piling out of your car. I could have used some of the bubbly water to clean up my coffee stain.
Yeah. Truth.
Hey, real quick before we get started this morning, got an email into our podcast, and you shared that with me this morning. That was fantastic. Patricia reached out to us, and I got to tell you, it means a lot when our coffee mates reach out to us.
Yeah, love getting emails, and it's really cool. You know, it takes us back to kind of behind the counter. Right. When we started out, we said, hey, why are we doing this? Right. We're not doing this for money. We're not doing this for any financial gain. In fact, it's just the opposite. But, why are we doing this? And we came back and we said, hey, we want to tell our stories, for those on the sober path to recovery, our stories of experience, strength, and hope. And in hopes that maybe it helps one person.
That's right. That's right. And
do you have it?
It sounds to me like
let's read it.
Sounds to me like Patricia found a little hope, and like you said, it is all just about the one person. But Patricia just said another great episode. Loved it. Perfect for the morning drive. Gosh, and if I lived by all my feelings, I'd be in the grave by now. Thank God for this program for people like you. Peace, Patricia. Patricia, peace back to you. Again, one person. Podcastville is a place that, I think people are looking for experience, strength, and hope. Others experience the strength and the hope to move forward. And I think they're finding it in Zoom rooms today. I think they're finding it in Podcastville. I think they're finding it in the rooms of 12-step programs.
Yeah, it's funny. I have an anonymous Twitter account. That's pretty big, and so I share the podcast on that, and people are like, man, this is great because I would never go in a room.
Right.
And
the only reason I want to spend a minute touting it this morning is because, again, tell your friends, tell somebody who's struggling. Just a couple of guys. We're no geniuses. We're no experts at this recovery thing, but we have our own story, and if our story can help you shape your story, then that's what it's all about. So thank you very much, Patricia.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, we love hearing from folks.
So what's topic this morning, coffee mate?
So I don't know, man. I've been thinking about prayer. I hear in the rooms and just my own, daily life. Prayer's an important part, right? But I hear so many people just like, man, I just don't get it, right? So, I love what you just said about not being experts. We're not experts. We've said that from day one. We're two guys that are on the same path, trying to get through today without having a drink and trying to live better. But prayer has been a very impactful part of my journey. Mm-hmm. Certainly not from the beginning. I like to underline Sometimes quickly, mostly slowly. But it has grown into a really key part. And I was talking to my wife, and she says, hey, what are you guys having coffee over? I said, I think we're going to talk about prayer. And she goes, I've never seen prayer work in life until I see it in you. And she goes, whenever I need to pray something, I have you pray for it because it works.
You got the inside track.
And I'm like, I'm still thinking about that. But, I have seen, like we talk about that dial of faith and facts. I've seen prayer work, period. End of story. Prayer works.
Right.
So let's just chat about it a little bit and digging in. And just to remind folks, we kind of break this down. We've been trying to keep it to 18 minutes, but we've been, not very successful lately. We've gone 21 or 28 or whatever. But we break each session down into 3 sections. One is kind of sharing our experience, what happened, right? Second is strength. What do we do in the sober gym? What do we do in the rooms? What do we do outside the rooms to really focus and get better? And then the third section is hope, right? That, what did we go through? What did we do? And now, what happened because of it, or what's happening, or what are we still expecting to happen? So from experience, what was your experience, early on with prayer? And
yeah, and it really what happens when you're young, I've found out as I got older, so much of what happens in your life, what transpires in your experience growing up, shapes you whether you like it or not as you get older. And I only say that because, for me, I've talked about it before, I think, at a coffees, but, I had that moment of realization when I was young. It was just a simple question posed to myself, is this all by happenstance or is there a higher power? And my moment of clarity was I probably was 6, 7 years old, and I was laying out on the front lawn looking up at the stars and just realized that, the way I came to the realization at 6, 7 years old that things were working. I could move my fingers without thinking about it. I was breathing in and out without any conscious decision. Things were growing and dying around me. And I looked up at the vast stars. That was back in the day when you weren't in the city, right? So, I saw stars, right? And I just thought, who are you? And I came to the realization I'm not God. I'm not a higher power. I didn't create the universe. I don't know who did. It took me years to maybe come to that realization or that understanding. But what I understood early on was that I'm not the creator of the universe. And so that was kind of my foundation going through life. So it was a conscious understanding through my life that I'm not God.
I love what you put, and I got to think on that, but I love what you put, hey, when we're young, right? And I'm sitting here thinking, when we're young, because I have some input from prayer when I was young, and when we're young, we're controlled.
Right.
And maybe that's not the right way to put it, but, we're directed by other people's input, direction. Sometimes we're just flat out told, this is what we do, right? And that shapes, kind of how what we take through life. And I really like how you put that. For me, when I was young, and specifically for prayer, I remember going to church and, sitting in the church aisle. And prayer was, our church services then were probably, an hour and 20 minutes. And I started cursing at the hour mark because why are we going over again? I'm going to get home and play, right?
Not out loud, I hope.
No, it wasn't out loud. I would have gotten smacked. But prayer was part of the church service. And I remember because I would time it. It'd be like 11 or 12 minutes of prayer. Wow. And, guys would get up in the pulpit and it was almost like a contest. Who can use the biggest words? Who can sound the most holy? Who can sound the most reverent? And the bigger words you use and the inflection and how you say it, the more God listens. Not. Right? But, they use words like sanctification and whatnot, so that's kind of my baseline of what I grew up with. And I'll talk a little bit later about kind of what things are like today, but it's nothing like that.
Right.
It's no contest.
Right. Yeah, I don't I don't think I was ever taught to pray. In my youth and even my adolescence, I went to
that's interesting.
I went to a private
wasn't either.
religious high school. It's funny,
And they didn't teach you how to pray?
Yeah, no, they really didn't. They taught me how to make sure the tuition was paid on time.
Number one priority, right?
That's right.
So, clearly our journeys and what we've been through and being in the rooms, there's a phrase that we hear a lot, right? And so growing up in church, they were one set of prayers. And then, being a drunk as I was, we had this phrase called Foxhole prayers, right? So how do you define Foxhole prayers?
Oh, I shot him up all the time, Oh, don't let him pull me over. Please don't let him pull me over. Please let me get home safe. Please let me make sure there's money left on this credit card to buy this next round. Yeah, I shot him up.
So if I could paraphrase that, when you're in deep shit, you pray.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that's Foxhole prayer.
Yeah. So I had 2 Foxhole prayers.
Okay.
That I was very. They were my go-to.
Okay.
And it was when I was in deep shit. It was usually either in deep shit or, I was drunk again. I couldn't get out of. I just couldn't get sober. I was, 1 month of over and over every single day, just rolls right into the next. So my 2 prayers were, God, please give me $1 million.
Okay, because that would solve your whatever woe you were having.
In my mind, at that point, $1 million was the ticket out of hell.
Sure.
Second one was, God, please stop these shakes. They were my 2 go-to, and I've said them 500 times, 1,000 times. I don't know. I said them a lot. And guess what? Going through that, I never opened my bank account and had $1 million. And God never stopped the shakes. I always had to go to a hospital. I always had to get, one more detox, one more, rounds of Ativan would eventually calm those shakes down. And then, as I think of prayer, I don't know, maybe it was 2003, right? I sat my parents down who were very religious and they believed in prayer. And, I'm sitting there telling my mom and my dad about my alcoholism. And they just sat there and they almost weren't concerned. They almost weren't fazed. And I don't know if they understood how bad it was. I think they did. But my mom very peacefully came back. She's like, Glenn, all you have to do is pray about it. And I'm like, Mom, don't be, I didn't say this out loud, but in my, because I respect and love the crap out of her. But in my mind, I'm like, Mom, that's a bunch of crap. There's no way, Mom. This is serious stuff. I mean, come on. And she's like, no. She's like, all you should do is pray. And I'm like, Mom, I got 10 doctors at Rush. I got the head of psychology at Rush, working on my case. I got this panel of doctors. I got all these medicines. I got all science behind it. And she just shook her head. She goes, all you have to do is pray. And as we go through, as we look back on our little chat today, it's amazing how accurate she was.
Yeah, right.
It just was. So,
well, it takes a while to, absorb that. The way I see it, really, Glenn, and this happened to me in my transformation as I, began working the 12 steps and focused on the first 3 steps. Literally focused on connecting with the higher power, right? And I came to the realization that if I was going to buy into step 2, that there was a power greater than myself that could restore me to sanity, and if I was ready to turn my will and my life over to the care of that God as I understood him, right? It's not a one and done thing. That's the realization I came to. It's not a one and done thing. I've got to now fuel or feed that relation. It's a relationship now, because now we're in this game together. We're in the game of recovery together. It's no longer just about me. So it's not just like, okay, I accept there's a higher power. Yes, I give it over to him. Okay, next, let's get to step 4 because I've got things to do. No, it's not that at all. It's the breath. It's the fuel in that for that engine, if you will, that higher power. Does that make any sense?
Totally. So, where in the program? I mean, is that when you first started being aware of prayer again, or?
Absolutely. The point of clarity. Well, so many things were becoming clear as I became sober. Right. That's just a positive byproduct of becoming sober. Things become clear, which sometimes works to your benefit. Sometimes it really stresses you out. But as it relates to prayer, I came to the realization that I had to keep that engine moving. I had to keep it fueled, that higher power engine fueled. I came to the realization that there was a higher power that wanted a relationship with me, more than just a request list. But prayer was the conduit of communication, right? Because I don't know about you, but I don't have God's email address.
No, totally. And as I think, and again, I wish I took better notes, but early in the program, September of 2014 is when I surrendered, right? So surrender to me was, I will do anything you tell me to do. I just can't take that next drink. And then it meant a lot beyond that, right? It meant I had to unlearn a lot of things. And I had to learn new ways of doing things, right? I had to be open to taking direction. And this prayer stuff, when people said, oh, you have to pray, I'm like, I went back to those church prayers. I'm like, I got to dust off my big words, Or I also know a lot of prayers are just like recited, and it's not, I don't want to say it's not meaningful, but to me, if I just recite something over and over again, I mean, I did that growing up with, our prayer, our grace that we said at meals, it didn't mean anything, and just recite it.
Right. Bubba dub dub, thanks for the grub.
Absolutely. It was something like that. I'd probably forget it today, but I had to be open. Part of my surrender, I had to be open to learning new ways of doing things, right? Even things I wasn't comfortable with. I just had enough faith in the program at the time that even though I was uncomfortable, it would be okay.
Well, I turned to Amazon. I mean, that's how desperate I was, Glenn. I turned to Amazon to tell me, find me the book, give me the ebook, give me the audiobook, tell me how to pray. Because I didn't know how to pray.
Did you really?
I did.
God, that's awesome.
Yeah, and there was a ton of resources out there, and I read
Prayer
a lot
for
of stuff.
Dummies?
Prayer for Dummies, right, exactly. I AKA Prayer for Mike.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but you know what? I came to the realization that, I think that's like the fifth time I used realization. Yeah, it's the big word syndrome. I came to the understanding that, you got to start where you are. That was my, I didn't know how. Even after reading the books that I've got on Amazon, what it all came down to, I just had to shut up and just speak from the heart and just start from where I was at and not worry about being a profound prayer, but just to reflect what was on my heart in a way that was healthy.
Yeah, so you went to Amazon.
Yep.
To learn and take direction. I got it from my church. So, I go to this church. It's Come As You Are. We've talked about it before. And, I thought it meant flip-flops. It really does, because I love wearing flip-flops at church. But it's really Come As You Are spiritually. And, man, I needed that. I needed a welcome mat that's saying, hey, you're a prodigal son. You're coming home. You're trying to figure this out. This whole spirituality thing out. It's okay. Mm-hmm. So they did a session, and probably at the 2-year mark, on prayer, and I realized, a lot of what I had known was significantly different. I'm not going to say it was wrong, but significantly different than this new way of looking at and learning about a new way of prayer. And one of the things we have this pastor, he's not our head, he's one of the pastors. Got long blonde hair, tats all over, right? And he gets up on stage, and I think this was during the session on prayer, but he talks about a relationship with God, not all the rules, not all the regiments, but having a relationship. He gets up, he puts his arms out, he puts his head back, he shakes his hair. Daddy. I was waiting for the lightning to hit.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, what hit me was the relationship. It's like my daughters, coming to me, and saying, Daddy. There was nothing better in the world, right? And what I'm understanding is that God wants to have a relationship with us, and he wants us to try to have a relationship with him, and it pleases him. It's a cool thing, right? So, I just learned, how to pray. And it worked. It was more of a conversation, right? And today I don't pray for $1 million. Today I don't pray for things. I pray for patience. I pray for courage. I pray for peace. But what I mostly pray for is others.
Right. Well, and isn't that the thing? There's a prayer that we say at the end of some meetings I go to, 12-step, and it's the Lord's Prayer, right? So, but there's, the one line that I really embrace is, thy kingdom come, and then it follows up with thy will be done. So,
good reminder.
Again, it's
good direction.
Yeah, it goes. It shoots me back to when I was 6-7 years old, and I'm not God. So, let His will be done. It takes a whole lot of stress and responsibility off of my shoulders. Let your will be done in this scenario, and sometimes that doesn't play out exactly the way I want it to play out, but it plays out in the way that my higher power wants it to play out, and for me that brings me to a place of peace and serenity.
Yeah, and that's another thing. I mean, my church was one source, and then secondly, AA is a source of kind of helping shape prayers. In fact, I printed out a bunch of just references from the big book and the 12 and 12 on talking about prayer, and the first thing it says, because, hey, I was very sensitive about prayer. I was like self-conscious, I guess. Right. But, the big book, into the chapter, into action, page 85, it says, hey, we shouldn't be shy on the matter of prayer. Right? And I was very shy. I was very shy about spirituality. God forbid, growing up, if anybody saw me carry a Bible, oh my gosh, that just was, crushing. But there's probably, I think there's 43 times in the big book in 12 and 12, it talks about prayer, rewards of meditation and prayer.
Well, and there's some real gems in there too. I mean, the Serenity Prayer, there's the long version, there's the short version that we all know, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. But the long form of that is living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship in the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy and with him forever in the next. I mean, that's powerful stuff.
Yeah, so I think if we talk about how do you learn, what do we do in the sober gym to learn how to pray, right? One, I think, is surrender and say, hey, I'm open to learn in a new way. I'm open to prayer. I'm open to trying this.
Right.
The first thing about prayer, for me, prayer changes the prayer.
Right.
It gets me outside of my head, which is a fumbling place to be.
Right.
But it gets me outside of my head. So then it's learned, right? So church was one, but through AA, and I personally am not a fan of just reciting prayers. I think at some point there's a disconnect, and there's just, I've seen people in church just roll off prayers and they're thinking about the football game, but their lips are moving, right? But from a developmental and understanding and learning standpoint, there are some really good prayers, and you just read one of them in AA, kind of used as a template, if you will, kind of a get-started template.
Right.
And maybe it's get started and continue doing them if it works for you.
Right.
For me, it was a great get start, and then I expound through more conversational prayer, more custom prayer, I guess. Right. But we actually printed some out.
Yeah, another one that really jumps out at me. It's found on page 59 of the Alcoholics Anonymous, the big book, and it's a prayer that they say after the third step, right? And so these first three steps are quite spiritual.
So it's called the third step prayer?
It's called the third step prayer, and it says this: God, I offer myself to Thee. okay? To build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of my bondage of self, that I may do better. Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Amen. You know, again, it's talking about the higher power's will. There's a lady in the program that I go to several meetings with. I love her to death, and she's got a phrase, and it just says, "May the universe unfold as it may," you know, or as it shall. I think she says, and
sounds like God's will, right?
Right. You know, exactly.
At
The
least it's not
universe
our
is just
wills.
going to unfold the way it should.
Right.
Who am I to change the course of the universe? And that's what third step prayer. But you know, you said something interesting. These prayers, and even the Lord's Prayer. You know, I have two options at the end of every meeting when it's prayed. I can either just recite it, right, and think about what I got going after the meeting, or I can buy into...
Which is what I do sometimes.
Yeah, well, I've trained myself to buy into each sentence, each word. Just buy into it, but totally embrace each word, each sentence, and feel it.
No, I love that word, embrace. And then, so that's a pretty good guide on kind of how to pray, some structure, some resources. How often do you pray?
Oh, multiple times throughout the day. I mean, I would say that I bookend my days with prayer, and you know, I'm not on my knees. I'm not in a chapel. But I might be sitting out on my back deck with a cup of java and looking at the sunrise, and I just close my eyes and just really start my day by saying, thank you for another day, another breath, another opportunity to share and experience and savor this, and then I close out my day as well with a prayer, just thanking that honestly, that I made it through the day sober, which is the most important thing to me, because without sobriety, I don't have anything. But then throughout the day, Glenn, I'm shooting them up there. I'm there because
Rapid fire.
Rapid fire. Wow,
Sometimes,
thank
right.
you. Wow, thank you. Give me the even before we have our coffees. Let this be about you, Lord. Let this be about you. Don't let it be about me.
I thought you were down there on your knees looking for something you dropped. You were actually saying a prayer before.
Yeah, picking up my spritzer water.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, it's funny, as you say, rapid fire. So, sometimes it's early on, because I can, over time, I've gotten used to just praying throughout the day. But early on, I needed something to remind me. Mm-hmm. So, I have a cell phone, just like a lot of people do, and my cell phone is an amazing device. It can do a ton of things, but guess what? It needs plugged in.
Needs to be plugged in.
It doesn't matter how. It's $1 billion plus product.
Wait, your phone cost $1 billion?
Might as well. You ever see my cell phone bill? But I mean, it has to be plugged in. So early on, I said to myself, okay, every time I plug in my cell phone, I'm going to say a prayer.
Oh,
and back then, it's so funny because my cell phone sucked back then, so I was plugging it in every 2 hours, right? So I prayed. Right. So now I got an upgraded one, and now the thing lasts 12 hours.
Yeah, 3 days.
Totally.
Right.
So my prayers, my reminders are less, but through that time, now I've gotten a habit. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've noticed is that my Foxhole prayers pretty much gone away, and I think the reason for that is because I have changed the way I live, and I don't get in those shit piles as much as I used to when I was drinking.
Right.
So if you don't live in the shit, you don't need those, Foxhole prayers. But a lot of my prayers today are for gratitude. It's for strength. It's for gratitude. Hey, God, thanks, man. This is cool. Mm-hmm. And as well with everything else in this program, I tried prayer, and I have seen facts. Right. Factually, the prayer works.
So my question
I know
to you...
you have too.
No, yeah, I have too. But my question to you would be, is prayer more important than the program, or is the program more important than the prayer? And I'm setting you up because I've got the answer to that.
Doesn't matter?
It doesn't matter. It's
Right.
it's inhaling.
Yeah.
Is inhaling more important than exhaling?
That's right.
Right?
You kind of need both. But I would tell you, the program brought me to prayer.
Right. Absolutely.
I never would have ever had a relationship with God or prayer or the communication if I didn't have this program.
Right.
And also, I think a key part of prayer, because a lot of people, and I don't get down on my knees. I know some people do. I did once. I just, I'm not there yet. But
Right.
But I also understand that a key part of prayer is spending time, quiet time, listening back.
Well, prayer meditation is
Yeah, because the conversation's
Sure.
two ways.
That's right.
And if you just put it out there and, God could be speaking to you, God could be showing you stuff, but if you're so busy, you're not paying attention, prayer doesn't work. Well, do you spend quiet time and listen? And,
right.
and God speaks to me in many ways. He speaks to me through you. He speaks to me through people in the rooms. And it just works today. I have too much proof.
Well, you have to listen. You have to listen.
So I have to go back. What book did you buy from Amazon?
Well, I bought several. One that I'll reference multiple times. It's a book by Emmett Fox, and it's a book called The Sermon on the Mount. And I love.
All right, so we'll put that up on the site.
Yeah, put it up on the site. It's great. If you look at the premise behind the Sermon on the Mount, it was the last big session that the Bible spells out and explains Jesus' last big preach, and it's just, if I were going to give my last sermon, I probably would be saying some pretty important things. The book itself is phenomenal, but there's a prayer in the back that I brought it in today because I knew we were going to be talking about prayer. Yeah, it's the forgiveness prayer. It's on page 175, and you talked a little bit about just reciting prayers, but this is a prayer to be recited, but there's a premise behind it. And I'm from page 175, and this has worked for me. It says, this method of forgiving is this: get by yourself and become quiet, repeat any prayer that applies to you, or read a chapter of the Bible. So get into a quiet place and then say this prayer quietly. I fully and freely forgive, insert name Glenn. I lose him and let him go. I completely forgive the whole business in question. As far as I'm concerned, it is finished forever. I cast the burden of resentment upon the Christ within me. He is free now, and I am free too. I wish him well in every phase of his life. That incident is finished. The Christ truth has set us both free. I thank God. And then it says, get up and go about your business. On no account repeat this act of forgiveness. I don't have to pray it again. I held such a resentment and such anger towards a certain individual when I first tried this prayer. I've used this prayer multiple times. And I tried to forgive. I said I forgave, but I didn't forget. I just carried this burden around with me. And practicing this prayer and handing that person the betterment of their life over to the care of the same God that I understand, the same higher power that I understand, this God I hand over myself to, I hand that person over to so that they're praying for their benefit, and then walk away from it.
Yeah, that changes things.
It changes things.
So one key takeaway for me today is, I kind of came in as a cynic about these template prayers, right? The ones that are written out. And probably a cynic because they didn't do or mean anything for me, right? Because, I'm just used to people reciting them, and I'm used to, especially when folks do it in different languages, right? I'm like, how do you get anything out of that? But I think what I learned today from our conversation, from you and from reading that, is I think I was doing it wrong, right? And if I use the pre-written prayers as a template, but think about them as I'm
Deeply.
reading them, instead of just trying to get through them, right? And what you shared is, when we do the Lord's Prayer, you focus on every word, right? When I when I recite the Lord's Prayer at the end of meetings, I'm thinking about throwing my coffee cup out. I'm thinking about who I got to see at the other, So it's me and how I was going about it. So that was a really key takeaway for me today, and I really appreciate that.
Well, my takeaway is to come to my higher power on a personal level, to come as I am, as you said, come as you are. It's okay to wear flip-flops. I did a little quick reading. I know we got to get out of here. I did a little quick reading, and
I know there's people waiting for our table.
Yeah, that's right. Literally. We've got, it says in the Bible, which is kind of my textbook to spirituality, it talks about the fear of God, fearing God. Well, it's not defined as being afraid of. It's meant to be reverent, respect, and real. So it's not to be afraid of. It's to embrace the reverency and the respect for that being. Mm-hmm. So, anyway,
prayer changes the prayer, brother.
Prayer changes the prayer. Hey, this has been good. I think we went a couple minutes over 18. But
again,
who cares? For those of you that are driving into work listening to this, just tell them you're sorry you're late, but have them check out Sober.Coffee.
Third time driving around the car. And hey, just a quick heads up.
Yes.
On prayer, this is part 1.
Part 1, right.
So we have part 2 coming up.
Don't want to miss that.
No, we have a gentleman that's going to read this prayer that for me, I will just say you got to listen to part 2.
All right. Sounds great. Hey, Glenn, have a great day, man.
Brian, thanks, brother.
All right, thanks, Brian.
Thanks for joining us for today's coffee chat. To contact the show, email us at podcast@sober.coffee. If you need immediate help, the AA hotline is 800-839-1686. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline is 800-273-8255. Remember, Mike and Glenn are sharing their own journey on the path to recovery. Any suggestions, medical or otherwise, are their own experiences and should not be viewed as professional advice. See you next week, and remember, there is a solution.
Stay safe in the city of Chicago. Beautiful city.